Yeah, I think we can.
Okay, great. So let's get started. Good evening for every one of those folks that are on Zoom as well as our YouTube channel. So my name is Alex, and I will be the moderator tonight. So a little bit about myself. I'm currently a electrical engineering and computer science PhD at the University of Michigan, Ann Arbor. I'll be graduating this year and be joining McKinsey in the Shanghai office. And today, we're very honored to have Stuart Chuang, who is the head of strategy and operations at Google, and ex-senior engagement manager at McKinsey, to come and talk about his journey from consulting to tech corporate strategy and operations at Google. So, Stuart, very nice to have you.
Thank you, Alex. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. So, actually, today we actually have a very packed schedule, but, kind of let me blaze through this disclaimer really fast, and then we'll get to Stuart. So there are 5 points I want to remind our audiences. One, we are a nonprofit hobby organization, so our event is strictly nonprofit. And second of all, our views are of our personal and not any professional advice, and do not represent the views of our current and future employers. Three, we restrict all forms of content sharing and recording, and legal liabilities will be imposed on violators, where we as organizers and Stuart as the speaker have the right to pursue. Fourth of all, please be professional and pay attention to the lower corner QR code right there, which would direct your questions to the speaker on Slido. And you're going to find this QR code everywhere. So please scan it and post your questions there and upvote. And lastly, please participate in the survey and stay until the end to kind of stay connected with us for future events. So thank you very much. And I guess today's agenda will be breaking it down into 3 parts. First, Stuart will talk about his pivots. And second, he will dive into his 3 takeaways from consulting. And then we will dive deeper into the technology, strategy, and operations. So without further ado, let me give the microphone to Stuart. Go ahead.
All right, thanks, Alex. Thank you, all of you. It's been just spend for 1 hour with me. So just a little bit background on myself. Right, currently, I'm part of Google. The title sounds pretty glorious. Part of this strategy and operations group. In a bit, I'll explain what that entails. But before that, I spent about 4 years at McKinsey, and the debate that I previously had was whether I did consulting or do equity research. I will ultimately opt for McKinsey, which turned out to be seems to be a better choice for me looking backward. And before that, I was doing my business degree at the University of Michigan, and that's how I got to know Alex. And I was born and raised in Taiwan. I was an engineer by training, did a little bit career pivot upon my first job at TSMC doing corporate finance, and then following the MBA at McKinsey, now at Google. Just a little bit caveat, right? So most of my career has been spent actually in the U.S. Versus Greater China. So a lot of the perspectives I'm going to share is very U.S. centric, and just a very fair disclaimer. So that's the short version of myself.
Yeah. So actually, I find something very interesting. First of all, I do come from the same background as you. I'm in electrical engineering, but I did all the way till my PhD. But very early in your career, I found out that for the TSMC job, you actually transitioned into corporate finance. So that was pretty interesting. Do you mind kind of elaborating a little bit?
Yes, of course. Electrical engineering is very interesting, right, in terms of the problem I'm trying to solve and the rigor of training that entails. But at the same time, started taking classes, right? Like I was quickly drawn to the business side of the world. I was taking economics. I was taking business classes. And it's just dawned on me in that process where maybe the business side of the world is a better fit. And so the options I was juggling with at the moment upon graduation was either I pursue a PhD path in electrical engineering, which is not a bad path, right? Which is could be a pretty good path. And actually, engineers, if you know deep learning, are actually paid very well, very decent nowadays. So financially, you might not, might be better off. But just interestingly, there was an opening at TSMC, which is basically the largest and better company that I have access to at that point. They were looking for an entry-level person. They didn't care that much of a background. I had friends in there, and I took a test and I got in. And looking backward, it was a risk, right? They were taking in me. I didn't know about financial statements. I didn't know income statements, all that, and I just kind of picked that up on the job. I did some, CFA at night and did a little bit GMAT at night. But yeah, that was pretty intense, right? Looking back, but I was pretty happy at the moment because it's something I like.
That's very interesting to learn.
Yeah, and one thing is probably not a best strategy to during your interview, but I was also very clear to them that I would be pursuing MBA in 3 years, which I exactly did. And I said that during the interview, and looking back, it was probably not the best strategy to pursue. But the MBA path was kind of clear to me at the beginning, so that was and that happened. But Alex, I mean, to your question, right? Like a lot of these dots kind of connect backwards, right? Like you kind of didn't know at the moment, and you're just pursuing the best option you feel most passionate about, and that's the path
I see. Yeah. So I actually feel a little bit opposite because most people do not develop this kind of insight very early on. You actually mentioned you had to take CFA studies very early on in your career and actually transition yourself into corporate finance and had a vision for MBA very early on. So, my very natural next question is going to be, why Michigan? Always go blue, but, you didn't know that before. Why Michigan?
Yes, Michigan was a good choice, not only for me, but also for my family. So I think I chose Michigan, partly because it's a good school, but partly because my wife was also applying. I was married at the moment. We both applied to 10 schools and we overlapped on 2, and Michigan was the better one. So realistically, that was one major driver. But at the same time, I was very open to a general management path, and Michigan Business School is very has a pretty solid alum network in that space. So it seems to be a quite reasonable option and choice for me at the moment.
I see. That's very interesting to learn. I'm going to save the questions for why McKinsey and why Google towards the end, because I feel that's even more interesting. But thank you for introducing the timeline. And, please talk about the next section.
Sure. All right. So when I was talking to Alex, we were just playing around what to share with you, since a lot of you would be incoming into consulting. So I just distilled 3 takeaways from my 4 years, and mostly in the US environment. Be curious, be bold, be you, and I'll talk to each of these, what it means. And some of them could sound like a cliche, but those are really from the bottom of my heart, and I learned it with sometimes in a hard way. So if you flip to the next slide. So the first thing I would just love to share with you is what I picked up from consulting is actually an interesting one. It's kind of contradictory to my personality as well, right? Like you are told, you're trained that you want to walk into a room with an agenda, and you want to be very conscious and very productive with your time. But as I did consulting, as you become more senior, engage with people. It's really a people business, and a lot of times it's not about you; it's about your client.
Mhm.
And a lot of times they have something that is underneath that you just didn't know. So it's very important that you really listen to the hidden cues.
Mhm.
So I'll share one example in a consulting engagement. So this was a study with a medical device company, and we were hired uh, to for efficiency reasons, right? Basically, moving jobs offshore. So in nature, it's very political, contentious, and we're working with this VP of just who's supposed to be our sponsor. And so like he should be agreeing to a lot of the things that we discussed. So we're in this proposal meeting, just a working meeting, and we're trying to give him a date. And during that meeting, he shot down every single point that we
Wow.
raised, every single point. So I was an engagement manager. I was at the moment, I was probably the one who'd be calling shots here. I just said, hey, Kevin, right? Just call him Kevin. Hey, Kevin, just because he is Kevin. And so Kevin, let's pause here. And it seems like you have a lot of things on your mind. Let's clarify. Let's have a discussion with you and come back to you later on. And later I pulled him on the side. I said, hey, Kevin, what's really going on in that room? And he told me that we kind of hitting the bush around the bush a little bit, and then he kind of left his guards and he told me that I had just had a really bad experience with another consulting firm, and they just pushed for all the agendas that I disagreed with, and put me in a very bad position with the board. So I just didn't want that to happen.
Mhm.
And so at the moment, I quickly got it. Nothing to do with the recommendation. It's not a logical thing. It's a very
Mhm.
emotional thing that we're solving for here. So I quickly just said, hey, Kevin, whatever we propose, you'll be the first to see, and everything that we will propose, you will be agreed with, right? And before we do anything. So after
Mhm.
that, he became an ally. But what I'm trying to highlight here is just you have to listen for the cues, and a lot of times it's not logical. A lot of times it's just it's people issues, and you're dealing with people. So some of the link here I put is some important references that I still found useful today, even in Google setting. So that's the first thing that I learned. Um, was an important one. I think that even at Google, you have a lot of virtual meetings, and it's not easy to
Mhm.
pick up the hidden
Here's what
cues.
I found on the web.
Thank you, Google. Uh, um, but the same logic applies.
Yeah. I see. I see. Yeah. So kind of like echoing you a little bit and double clicking a little bit. What I heard from you is that, first of all, you mentioned that, consulting is really a people business, and you have to deal with a lot of emotions. And most of the time you need to read between the lines. So, kind of during this pandemic, even for us right now, we're doing this kind of, remote thing. And I can imagine it would be especially hard for you to kind of not only manage the entire team across geographies, but how do you really kind of, kind of read between the lines when you're doing this kind of remote work style? Any suggestions?
Yes. Well, it's hard, right, to begin with, and that's a great question.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think the benefit of Google is very big on one-on-ones, meaning like Alex, you and me, right? Like in a video conference, I can actually
Mm-hmm.
just see your face and talk. Um, so that's probably the first thing I would go to, which is if I send something, I
Mm-hmm.
would just say, hey, let's bring this on and let's talk in a one-on-one setting.
Mm-hmm.
Usually it's harder to pick up the physical cues and just frowning and all that, but slightly easier in a one-on-one setting. So
Mm-hmm.
uh, usually I would just make a call or I just set up a meeting with an individual if I sense anything that
Mm-hmm.
is eerie. But that's a very good one.
I see. I see. So what I'm hearing is kind of like, there's a sense of over communication in this aspect. So is this something that you kind of adopted while you were at McKinsey? And is it a recommended skill you kind of want to be pushing, kind of new consultants to kind of adopt really fast before kind of moving into corporate?
Yeah, well, it's actually a good segue to the second. Smith, I'm going to share here, right? The, the next thing I'm going to share is you want to over communicate, and the communication of your work is equally, if not more important than actually doing the work. A lot of times, right, like we adopt this Asian mentality, at least like for me at the beginning of my career, is that as to put your heads down and do great work, good things will happen. And most of the time, it's true. But in a professional setting, perception is kind of reality. So you need to do great work, and you need to over communicate and safeguard and protect your reputation. It's not like that. It's weird. I'm not saying anybody's gonna sabotage you in a career, but like people miscommunicate, people misrepresent, and it happens. You just need to sense those and protect your work, protect your team.
I see. So, Stuart, I may have to stop you for a while because it seems your connection is not really good on my side. So, you mind adjusting your location or maybe try to, dial in by phone to see if the connection gets better because it seems kind of like flimsy at my end.
Okay. I can hear you pretty well though. So maybe, do you suggest that I dial in by phone?
So, Terry and Catherine, do you think it's a little bit stuck or is it just me?
I also have the same issue on my end.
Okay.
All right. But if this persists, let's have Stuart call in.
Yeah. So no problem. So Terry, why don't you send over the link and let's continue. If this persists, Stuart, please refer to kind of Terry's mail to see how to dial in. Okay. So thank you for answering, kind of my question. It's definitely very important to read between the lines. And, what you mentioned, kind of a lot of the Asian mentality may be, bury your head, do the work, kind of grind it out. But, communication is definitely a very important aspect. So this kind of moves on to your second point, right? Do you want to talk a little bit about it?
Yeah, actually, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, right now it's perfect.
Sure. So yeah, I kind of talk to this, right? Like I'm not trying to profile every one of us to be the same type, right? Like I bet some of us are more outspoken, but this is something that I found to be valuable at least the first 2 years of my consulting career, where being an associate or analyst, all you need to do is to do work, right, to some certain extent, and your manager kind of lives with you, right, pretty much work with you very closely day to day. So he probably has a bigger read in terms of the quality of the work. But as you become more senior in the org, you become a manager, you're leading teams. It's sort of your job as well to be safeguarding what your team does. So that's number one. Number two on this slide is there will be opportunities for you to pick your teams or at least maybe the first two engagement, you don't really have a choice. You just got assigned to whatever's available. But over time, you have choices, and you will bump into great teams, and hopefully that's the only thing you bump into. Chances are you could get into very tricky, nebulous situations or bad leadership or both. And in those circumstances, my recommendation is don't dwell on a bad setting. So if you sense something is wrong, right? The team has no direction. You're sleeping 1 a.m. every day, and there's no progress. Check out, right? Talk to your professional development manager. Get yourself out of that study, versus just sitting on and waiting the tide to subside, or getting better. Usually it doesn't. It's even more important that so when you smell your leadership is not doing the right things that is in accordance with the firm's values. I believe most of the leaders are legit and law-abiding teams. It will be a small number. Actually, don't bump into those. They do something in the reason. And for those, don't associate your name with people. Get out, and you might get hurt, right? Short term, like you can get a little bit harder to start your next project. You get some, I promise you, and just get yourself out of there.
I see. Okay.
Yes. I personally dwelled in that situation for 5 months, and looking back, probably would have done it differently.
I see. Well, thank you for sharing, Stuart. But a minor issue, we're still kind of experiencing a bad sound quality. So do you mind kind of we pause for a while and maybe you dial in via your phone?
Sure. Let me try to do that.
Sure, let's try that out. So we also give the audience a break, I guess. We have a very packed content schedule today. So hopefully during the setup, please feel free to refer to the lower right corner. We have a Slido link, and scan it with your phone. And please, log your questions on Slido and upload those that you feel also resonates with you, and we'll get to them later.
Alex, just so you know, we have a poll.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So why don't we do a poll right now? Actually, we should have been doing this in the very beginning, but it's actually a very interesting poll. So go ahead. There are 3 questions that we have posted. So, folks in the Zoom box, please go ahead. Yeah, so for folks that are actually streaming from YouTube, we're actually doing a poll. There are 3 questions. The first is, what is your current near-term career aspiration? And for the folks that are in Zoom, a lot of us are coming from consulting, but there's also an option for strategy operation, PVC, IB, PM, data science, engineering, and others. So kind of vote yourself, vote it in your heart, and maybe we can kind of get to some of the insights later. Second question is that, because we're talking about corporate strategy and operations, so is it a future career option for you? Think about this question. And third, if you were to exit to a corporate strategy and operation option, how would you envision your major driver be in considering this job? Would it be the money? Would it be the prestige, the project scope, the people exposure, or better work-life balance compared to IB or consulting? It's something worth thinking about. So, think about this while we're waiting for Stuart to come back.
Hello?
Hey, Stuart, are you back? Hi, Stuart, are you back?
I'm not sure.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Hello?
Hi, Stuart. Can you hear us?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, great. Yeah, the sound quality. Yeah, sound quality is phenomenal. So actually, we were utilizing the time while you were dialing in. We actually did a short survey. Do you see the results that we have posted on your Zoom?
Um, let's see. Should I be looking at the chat, or is there a place where I can?
There should be a sharing poll result. So
Right, yeah, I'm sharing it. Alex, I think you can read just out loud to Stuart.
should I just relaunch the polling?
I think it should show up on the screen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you
Right,
see?
but because Stuart is viewing it on his phone, right? Probably
see.
it won't show. So why don't you just share the result to him?
Yeah, so actually, the three questions that we conducted a poll for you is first of all, what is our audience's current and near-term aspiration? So 74% of us are actually responded consulting because that's within the group. But some folks actually responded around 12% to strategy and operations and almost 8% to PE and VC. So that's kind of like the first question. And second of all, corporate strategy and operation as a future career option, almost 95% voted yes on that option. So, a lot of people want to be you sometime in the future. And the third question I asked them is actually, if you were to exit a corporate strategy and operation right now, what would you envision be the major driver in considering this job? So my options were, first of all, the money. Second of all, the prestige. Third of all, the project scope. Fourth of all, the people exposure. Fifth of all, the better work-life balance compared to IBM consulting. And that's what most people put their bets on. So that's kind of the result that we did.
Got it. You said work-life is the bigger one?
Yeah, so actually, how about we validate this hypothesis with you right now? Do you feel that the work-life balance is significantly better than you were in consulting at Google?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, any corporate America would be hands down better than consulting, right? Like, this is not a discouraging message. I think there are ups and downs in consulting, and there will be 40-hour, 50-hour week times, and there will be 90-hour week times, right? It's like ebbs and flow. I think the tougher thing in consulting is more the travel, right? The travel is I think easier to handle when you don't have families with you or you don't have kids, but it's just becoming more of an element when you have a full family, and a lot of people opt out for that reason. But yeah, I think the busyness definitely is better in any corporate world, especially. I think that's what I felt in Google.
I see. Thank you for the very honest answer. And we definitely look forward to corporate consulting. I believe a lot of the folks. So how about we jump to your third point?
Sure. This might sound like a cliche, but I'm just want to highlight a reality where why do you need to make kindness a habit, and who is this targeting and directing to? So this is in particular directing to your partner teams who will be supporting you, who cannot say no to you, right? In some sense. Let me give you an example. So in McKinsey, you have a team that is called visual graphics, and they could be sitting locally with you. They could be sitting in India. A lot of them sitting in India. Here's what usually happens, right? Like, so you have a CEO meeting tomorrow. And therefore, you have a meeting with your senior partner today, just to prep for it. And the senior partner didn't know what you did previously, but he has a very completely different agenda. So your decks get teared apart, and you need to make 30 new pages today, overnight. And so what do? So you probably just draw up something on a piece of paper. You would send it over to India and say, hey, make this happen. And your India colleague would call back and say, hey, this is too much. We just don't have the capacity. You have two options. You can either get creative or you escalate and you shout back, right? And you say, hey, just do it. Many people, including myself, did the second option, right? In some cases and some instances. That's something I look back and actually thought I could have done differently. And the risk of you doing that is you don't get called out, and there's no consequences.
Mm-hmm.
And if the meeting with the CEO actually went well, you actually get compliments, right? And you just think, just forget about it. So there is no check and balance in your life to act kindly with the
Mm-hmm.
people that are, in a weaker position.
Mm-hmm.
That's something I just encourage us to be mindful of. There will be high stress environment, and in small places where you can, just please be kind to your colleagues.
I see. Thank you very much for sharing. I've always heard that kindness really goes a long way and can benefit your long-term career. So yeah, thank you. That's a very interesting point. So kind of moving on a little bit, we talked on the phone, and you kind of told me very interesting stories regarding, your key decision points and what you actually made you to go into consulting. So do you mind kind of talking a little bit about your buckets of considerations?
Consulting or Google? Or both?
Or actually, both. You can kind of briefly mention what you did at your final year at Michigan.
Sure. Why consulting was because it was a broader platform. B, my options that were presented to me were either a finance option at a bank, or McKinsey was the only consulting. I was actually not planning to recruit for consulting. McKinsey was kind enough to extend an interview and then an offer. So I was actually asking around, right, which is the better option. And the bank person actually told me to go consulting. So I just said, okay, yeah, fine. If the bank person says so, then probably that's the better thing to do. And it turned out to be, I think, a better choice. But yeah, consulting is like an MBA 2.0, right? In the sense that if you haven't done MBA, what an MBA student constantly thinks about is, what is my industry? What is my function, where I want to be spending my time on, and where do I spend time geographically wise?
Mm-hmm.
And so you constantly ponder around these three things.
Mm-hmm.
And consulting is basically that. But at the same time, you garner a lot of toolkits, right? And problem solving and stakeholder management, all these skills carry you a long way. So I think that's a great choice. After I've done this stint for about 4 years, I was trying to get back to technology, and it's just an area that I was very passionate about. But geographically, I sit in the Midwest, right? So wasn't a lot of access to the latest and greatest and the flashy projects. Those are smaller in numbers anyway. Not saying if you're sitting on the West Coast to have better access. Just in nature, these big tech doesn't do that much with these consulting firms. So was pondering, do I want to stay in consulting and do efficiency projects and just letting people go, or should I be doing something else in an area that I really feel passionate about? So I chose the former, and it's primarily for the content, right? Just the space I want to be in, and the options that I was looking at were listed on the right-hand side of the slide, where I had Google as an opportunity. I had some opportunity with some fintech payment companies, as some startup opportunities. I also was offered some general management positions, and investments is kind of spotty and a bit less of an option, but that was on the plate as well. Ultimately, I chose Google for again it was the better conversations I've had in that process. I talked to 4 teams at Google, and all of them were great, and they were also very respectful to my personal situation and in geography. I said I need to stay in Alberta, and they said, oh yeah, fine. We have an office for you. There are 500 people. You just have a desk. there, and you can figure out later on. And so I was feeling great about the content and their respect to my personal situation. So so I took it, and so far it's I think 3 years. I've done 3 roles at Google, and my current role, which I will explain. I think it's one of your questions later on. What kind of projects? I'll expand on it. But it's largely about how do we make sales within Google Ads more effective, more customer centric, and a lot of interesting topics. So if I were to choose again, I'd probably do the same in 2017.
I see. That's very glad to hear. It makes seems like you made a really right decision and going into something that you really like. But then again, I'm going to be probing a little bit on more specific decisions in later sections regarding your work, and I think the audience will be very interested. But I think the section that you want to be presenting next is actually very interesting, since everyone is kind of stuck at home these days. But you recommended some books, some podcasts, and blogs. Do you mind talking about probably 2 or 3 that you felt most influential for you, maybe back then or even as a Google strategist right now?
Yeah, well, depending on what your objective is, I mean, these are all like interesting books, and I'm happy just to distribute this one page to the group later on, so you can click on the links here. It's actually ranked order by just what I think would be interesting to people. So the books, the top 2 books at front is about how Google works, basically. Eric Schmidt is the business founder of Google, who basically taught Larry and Sergey how to make money out of search. So I think that book is worth reading. And the second book, Les Block, was SVP of Google People Operations, and he's now doing a startup endeavor in HR transformation. This book tells you something about the philosophy of the people strategy within big tech, which is very different from, I think, some of the traditional Fortune 500. This basically tells you a manager of a big tech is your mission is not to micromanage your team or characters or stick. Your job is actually bring great people in, and you inspire them to do great things and just leave them alone. So it's a very different philosophy, and so it's kind of mind blowing to me when I read it. But a lot of these books are great, and just I don't want to over index on this session, but just something to think about. The blogs here, the first one is a good read. Ben Thompson is a great strategic thinker. A lot of the blogs are actually read by a lot of the not only Googlers but also many people in the tech space. A lot of senior people quote his analysis, so that is a good one. Just the free portion of it is pretty good. If you're interested, you can subscribe. I think it's like $10 a month or something, but that one's also very good.
I see. So thank you for your recommendation. We actually compiled this and sent it out to all of the participating audiences for you. So hopefully the audience also gets to read upon it and learn from what Stuart has learned in the past. So, kind of concluding the previous sections regarding your transition from consulting into tech strategy operation, in the kind of last section, I really want to be probing a little bit into, a lot of the decisions, either intangible or tangible. So when I ask why Google, I figure that you get asked about this a lot. And previously you have mentioned that for yourself, it's a lot of alignment between your personal kind of aspirations. But is there anything more like intangible or maybe like cultural that you want to be promoting a little bit about what you have seen at Google compared to other tech companies?
That's a great question, Alex. I like to be balanced, so I'll speak to what I like and I'll speak to what I like less about Google.
Okay. That's fabulous.
I think what I What I enjoyed so far at Google is it sounds like a cliche, but the culture is very different in the sense that I've been at companies or work with companies in consultant capacity. There are three models to treat your employees. There are employee as an expense, right? So you basically your company is just trying to minimize you. There's an employee as an asset, right? So they invest in you, but you have to keep on producing, right, and prove yourself being useful. And you have an employee as an owner, and as a person. So Google is the third, right, model, and I've been in all three. So I enjoy the liberty, right, the freedom, the respect that you get in a Google setting. It's a company that strives for diversity, equity, inclusion. I mean, McKinsey also does, but I don't think it's to the extent that Google does it. So that aspect I really enjoy a lot. The second thing is Google as a company is still very, it has a platform for you to explore different topics, somewhat similar to a consulting setting in the sense that it has a broad portfolio of things, right? If I just found I exhaust everything in ads, I could explore things in on the cloud side, in hardware, in Waymo or Google X, and these are all options. There's a culture of parallel, like horizontal moves. People actually like that versus an external hire. So you get a lot of opportunities once you get in. So I'm a person who likes change and doing new things. So that is quite important to me. What I enjoy, not so much, or took a little bit of time to get used to, is something that you probably will feel in corporate America in some capacity, right? Which is the speed of change is very somewhat slower. You're not talking about months, right? You're talking about a year or maybe years to make things happen. And the stakeholder web is a lot more complicated than you coming as a consultant. You only engage the people that you need to engage. So navigating the org, the complexity of it, the communication cost that is associated with that, it is something that you just need to deal with, and that's kind of cost of doing business. Overall, I think it's been a positive experience so far.
I see. That's very interesting to learn. You're doing very well at Google, and kind of a little bit from my understanding, compared to other tech firms, Google actually kind of promotes itself much slower. I'm not really sure if that's also so for the strategy kind of branch. But one of the audience actually has a very, I also feel very interested because it seems that you actually ascended through the levels pretty fast while you were at Google. And I was wondering, do you have probably like 3 takeaways that you can summarize to say how you actually excel in Google, especially in coming from consulting?
I would say if you can survive a high pressure consulting environment for a couple of years, you'll probably do pretty well at Google or any of these tech companies, right? The intellectual challenge will not be anything that you cannot overcome. So the ambiguity, the problem solving, the stakeholder management, like all these skills applies. Right. So I think you learn from consulting, and that those fully transferable. I think the differentiating factor is about the network that you build, right? The people that you know. A lot of times these opportunities kind of happen, just go organically. I wasn't planning to make a lot of these jumps, and a lot of times it's just you do great work and people present opportunities down the road. So I wouldn't characterize myself as a very strategic career-wise, I would say, I was just trying to do great work, and I'm passionate about knowing people, what they do, and try to be helpful in their way. So I think that kind of pays dividend. So probably it's not the most satisfactory answer. I cannot give you.
Oh, no. I think
insights, but
I think it's very insightful and definitely, kind of resonating to your previous point in kindness and dealing with people. It really kind of makes sense to me right now. So, jumping to the second question, which a lot of us are very interested in. So what kind of strategy projects have you worked on at Google? You can share those that are not so sensitive. And what are those projects so special, in strategy and operation, specifically in tech? I see. So actually, I'm very interested, in another perspective, which our audience is actually very interested in, is what is kind of like the similarity between your engagements at Google compared to, for example, McKinsey? It seems to me you're also facing customers, or AKA clients, in a sense. So what is the difference in dynamics, and what is your personal feeling? Is there anything that you carried over from McKinsey to facilitate you in the strategy projects that you're doing in Google?
Sure. So let me maybe just characterize when I say clients. This is not actually like external clients. Right? So all the clients you're serving actually are internal. So
I see.
I would say a lot of times you're working with a lot of sales leaders, and you're making sure that their teams are operating at full speed and getting what they need to actually get more revenue for Google. Right. So. I would say most of the stakeholders that we're engaging are actually internal Googlers, and not like a advertiser who's buying from Google. So in that light, what that means is the relationships within Google are long lasting, meaning like you probably don't want to burn bridges. Because those go with you. But at the same time, the positive side is it accumulates, right? So if you do great work and you got a great reputation, it actually compounds and helps you. The similarities are actually pretty transferable. Like a lot of the consulting toolkit applies, especially on the hard skills. Right, all the slides, all the Excels and sheets, like those are kind of the fundamentals. And then I think the consulting training also gives you a sharper intuition regarding how to make changes happen. The change management toolkit helps a lot. So from a skill set standpoint, I think it's generally applicable. As a matter of fact, if you are approached by Google or any big tech, Facebook, for example, they know what you can do. They know what you can offer. And mostly what they're looking for is the general list toolkit, the horsepower of problem solving, ability to navigate ambiguity, and get things done. Right? So I think a lot of the toolkit really applies.
I see. So actually, I think that's a very interesting answer, and kind of resonates to my second point is, because you've worked with a lot of clients in your consultant life, your previous life, what do you find is like the very difference in strategy and operations in tech compared to non-tech entities? Any thoughts?
Yeah. So I would say tech or Silicon Valley, right? Like just to maybe just narrowing it down a little bit.
Sure.
Silicon Valley culture is very, very distinct, and I think it kind of lives in its own bubble in a way that it's about it's about creativity. The sky's the limit, and it's really, really Californian, right? In a way. The non-tech customers, if you think about where they possibly would sit, they're probably sitting in the lower growth quadrant, right? They're probably facing more pressure in their bottom line. They're trying to grow, but at the same time, they want to keep their costs and expenses in check, right? So a lot of times the consideration is not mainly about growth, and sometimes it's about just performance, what we can get out of the money that we spend. So in those circumstances, the conversation around is not about can we get you 1 million, 2 million more customers. It's about how do we optimize what you're already spending on and squeeze more money out of it. Right. So it's very different conversations, if you will.
I see. Very different mentality indeed. Jumping to the third question. So can you talk about some of the transition struggles, specifically from consulting moving to think about your first year at Google? What actually went well and what didn't go so well? Any suggestions?
Yes. So I think what I kind of touched upon this a little bit in the what I like less, right? But I think the first year that I spent here, there wasn't really a pronounced struggle. As a matter of fact, I think I got into the rhythm quite quickly. A lot of the consulting toolkit applied, right, as I just described. The thing that I struggled with is people always talk about roles and responsibilities. I don't know why, right? Because it seems like in a lot of the consultant times, right? Like if you talk to a person, the title kind of explains what he does. At Google or any Silicon Valley company, that's not necessarily the case, right? So a company, could give you a title and you could totally doing different things, and sometimes you could be doing the same thing but without you knowing it. So it's a very interesting conversation. Always like in the first conversation with any folks, you kind of need to ask, well, what do you really do? And that's something that I just haven't really thought about, right? In my previous lives, and that's just something that's very, very interesting. And
I see.
But I wouldn't call it a struggle. It's just something I need to get used to. And the second thing is the communication cost is higher, right, in the sense that it's a very big one-on-one culture. You need to talk to everyone, and therefore that compounds, right? There's just a lot of meetings, and you really don't have a lot of time doing work during the daytime, and at least at the beginning. These are probably the two things that I took a little bit of time to get used to. But again, no big deal. I think those are just costs of doing business.
I see. I'm actually very curious. So it seems to me you mentioned a lot about your one-on-one meetings or very intensive engagements. You were an engagement manager before in McKinsey, right? And the way I understand consulting works is that EMs may check on their team every 2 or 3 hours, but I believe that mentality doesn't really apply in tech, right? So in terms of intensity, how would you kind of balance or transition?
You mean as a manager or as an independent contributor?
As a manager, because you manage a very geographically disparate team, right? You're in Ann Arbor, and I heard a lot of your team is actually in the Silicon Valley.
Right. So the way that you manage is, I think you start from a place of trust, and secondly, you kind of find at the beginning, right, how you can complement each other. Some people just need more help in analytics. Other people need your help in socialization and engage with people. You kind of need to individualize who needs what. So once you have these two things, right, you build trust, you know how each other work, you are very clear in terms of where you supplement or complement each other. It becomes easy. So I just basically have a 1 hour meeting with my team member every week, each individually. We talk about what is the priority, what are the things that each of them are doing, where can I be helpful. And over the week, we just do email, we do check-ins, through chats, right? We ping each other when they need me. But I'm pretty hands-off when in general, and that's just basically the company culture. They kind of just want to hire great people, and after you do that, you need to trust them. So
I see.
That's how we engage.
Well, I really envy the autonomy that you have in your team, and congratulations in leading such a great team. So the fourth question I'm interested in is, how is your current career trajectory, different compared to consulting? And might I be a little bit specific? We kind of all view consulting as a, very fast trajectory role to, probably exit to the industry. But, you kind of jumped after you hit a senior engagement manager, right? So my first question is, how is your trajectory different, and how are you kind of adapting to this difference?
Sure. Well, in general, any corporate America, we slow you down, right, in terms of trajectory. But I think places where, not necessarily so like Google, in the sense that, first of all, the mirroring in Google to consulting is pretty clear. So if you're a partner at McKinsey, you come over as a director at Google. If you're an associate principal, you come here probably as a head of something, which is the current role that I'm in. If you're engagement manager, you come in as a something senior manager. The mapping is pretty clear. And Google, in general, it's slower, right? Like you kind of need to spend 2-3 years or maybe longer for a run. There are cases where you can shorten that by doing more higher visibility work or better, more important work, impactful work. But yeah, like generally, you just it slows you down a little bit. But in general, I don't think the differential is that different, especially the consulting ascension or the ladders, especially at the associate principal one, is extending, right, given the current circumstances. So I think the gap of the myth of the accelerated path in consulting is generally true, but not necessarily in the tech space in some cases.
I see. So double clicking on that a little bit, one of our audiences were very interested to see, because a lot of the corporate strategy operation role actually transitioned from consulting. As a matter of fact, I actually did like a LinkedIn search on Google strategy operation, and I believe over half of them came from MBB. But you talked about trajectory, right? And you kind of said that in tech role, it's a little bit of a myth. And I wanted to kind of have your perspective, like talking to some of the audiences that are not thinking of going through consulting and then to tech, directly going into tech strategy and op. What does the trajectory look like, and what are some of the barriers that you see?
I think that if the question is, do I go consulting or do I go tech directly?
Something like that.
Something around those lines. If the decision is that, then I think trajectory is an angle, but not necessarily the only angle. By that I mean, my general encouragement is that if you know your long-term path where you're going to spend time, like let's say 10 years, the next 10 years, you're pretty sure you're going to spend time in tech, I would just usually encourage them to go for it. And I've seen cases like that as ascending at the same pace as you would in consulting, right? And they do well. So there are cases where you can make that happen. The case for consulting is optionality, right? So not only do you ascend fast or faster, you also are presented with options when you exit, right? So you can play around the geography, function, or industry you want to be part of. You have more options than tech, right? You can be a VP in a Fortune 500 companies that is not necessarily a fan company. And for those cases, it's not necessarily the space or industry you want to be in. It's more the impact in the position or general management toolkit, right, you're optimizing for. So I would just say this space, right, where you play, I think that the trajectory is just the one element, and that element and differential is kind of shrinking nowadays. So I would just say, hey, follow if you have clarity, right, where you want to spend time, just go for that. If you don't, then yeah, go for consulting. It's not a bad option at all.
I see. Very interesting perspective, and that actually answers more than half of our audience's question. So, audiences, bear in mind Stuart's recommendations. So, actually, my last question for this part is going to be, what are some of the recommendations for folks aspiring a future S&O exit? So do keep in mind our previous post actually has a poll of 95% of our fellow, COPE members that actually think consulting, exit to S&O is a very great option. So there are 3 questions I want to be asking you, and please answer in any arbitrary order. The first is, to kind of prepare ourselves for a potential exit, what kind of projects should we be getting on? And second of all, whom should we be networking with early on? And third of all, what are kind of like the skills, tangible or intangible, that we should be attaining while we're in consulting?
Great. Thank you. I have to say this is a very forward-looking group, and I wasn't thinking any of this when I started, at least my first 2 years. But looking back, I would say what kind of projects to get on. The projects that helped me to get where I got to with Google was in sales and marketing. So if you can get some experience more on the revenue side, growth side versus efficiency, right, which is actually a lot of the volume of work right now in the consulting space. Get on those. I think that anything that would touch upon Salesforce transformation, where do you grow your revenue, any strategy work, sales and marketing work, I think would be very helpful. As a matter of fact, I think I only did a couple sales and marketing, and those were just cases and examples that I constantly use in my interview process. So those are helpful. And after one study, you're an expert, right? Like by consulting standards. So I could claim myself as a sales and marketing expert in that regard. And whom to network with? It's a great question. And the most effective strategy that I've seen is you all use LinkedIn a little bit, or any like professional networking tool. What I did when I was on search, I just subscribed LinkedIn Premium, and I look for the intersection, like similar profile, right? Like the people who did consulting for X number of years as you, exit slightly earlier than you, and in a company or a position that you're interested in, and then just reach out through LinkedIn and in your own network, using McKinsey, BCG, or Bain. All of those networks are pretty good. I think there are just a few hundreds of alums, right, each at Google or any big tech, right? Just those would be the primary source of information and outreach that we do. And just do cold emails, and maybe half of them will reply, and that's at least the number that I got. And then you got on an informational, right, as you're doing right now, Alex, and ask what their journey was like. Ask them to talk about themselves most of the time, and usually people like talking about themselves. And then ask for names, right, like the people that they think you could be talking to, and those how I started my outreach. What skills to obtain? I think all of us would pick up all the basics, right? Like the basic consulting readiness, and the hygiene for slides, for Excel. Those are I think everybody would just naturally. I think that the 2 things I found to be very helpful from McKinsey are storytelling. So if you can own a whole deck and you get to write executive summary, please do that. that is a skill set that is rarer than you think in any corporate, right? Like, can you tell a very simple, good story with fewer slides? And those are, and even today, I'm still learning, right, how to be super effective and super simple. So storytelling. The second thing is change management. How do you actually make a company or part of the organization do things differently? There are a few things, right? Like McKinsey has a change management framework. Every company, every consulting firm will have their own interpretation. Getting familiar with those would be very helpful. Things I still use today.
I see. That's actually a very, very interesting suggestion. And, talking about like a storytelling, telling a very compelling story, influencing people, as well as you mentioned change management. This kind of ties back to one of the questions I was going to ask you in the first part regarding what kind of projects to work on. So my conception of like going into tech, this is just my hypothesis. Would it be better to get staffed on, for example, digital related projects? I know you mentioned revenue growth as opposed to CapEx optimization, maybe one of the priorities to target for, but how about like digital or any of the emerging trends that you see may have better transferable skills, or at least, when you go kind of interview for Google, you get an invite. What kind of projects would you kind of recommend on that regard?
Well, yeah, if you can get onto digital or digital transformation, or you get to develop an app for your customer, like those would be great, right? Opportunities. I just didn't see that kind of projects happening in volume, so and therefore not generally accessible to a lot of folks. But yeah, like if you get access to those, I think those would be beneficial. If you can't, that's totally fine. I think that I picked up the domain knowledge, right, in digital marketing pretty much on the job. It's a very complex space. The offering are very complex. But it's something that you can pick up during. And the interview would actually not be expecting you to speak knowledgeably. If you can, that's great. That's totally plus. But if you can't, don't worry about it.
I see. So I guess you talked a lot about a lot of information in this section. So I'm just going to kind of whip up the takeaway for our audiences. So, get on projects that are either, have revenue growth or high change management capacity, and perhaps stay away from CapEx optimization to kind of align yourself for Google. That's the first point. And in terms of network, use your time when you're about to leave to kind of cold mail. Don't feel afraid to reach out, just as I did with you. And the kind of skills to obtain, you talked about the change management framework and more about storytelling to really influence people, right? I hope I got everything as a takeaway.
Yeah, I think that's a fair representation.
Okay. Yeah. So actually, we are definitely going to go over time today, but I feel that, the audience has enormous interest in you, Stuart. So actually, we're going to go into this Q&A where I'm going to call it like lightning questions. In a sense, I'm just going to ask you a question and maybe try your best to answer it in around 30 seconds. Does that sound fair to you?
Yeah, sure. I'll try to do that in the next 10, 15.
Yeah. So the first question is a little bit more personal. It's regarding one of the audience found your experience very interesting because you interned at McKinsey Taipei, but you switched over to Detroit. What is the cultural difference, and what is kind of the major driver for this change?
Well, the major driver is partly family. Like my wife was still in PhD, so they were human, right? They were just, I said, full time, I need to start somewhere closer to home, and say, okay, I'll place a call for you. So Bill Weissman was back then the office manager, and I still feel gratitude. So that was partly that. The cultural differences Between Taipei and Detroit, they're actually similar in the sense that they're all smaller offices. They roughly got like 50 consultants or so. I don't know what the latest read is, but they're smaller, they're closer knit, and they're always having some, existential like paranoia. They want to grow. So like in a sense, they're pretty similar. And secondly, the McKinsey problem solving, like the seven step or whatever it is, like that works pretty well as well. Like that's actually a global language. So I think the difference is actually not that major. I think that the time that I took to adjust a little bit was actually the cultural one, right? Like I think the U.S. culture versus the Asian culture is like, it's more outspoken. You have to be more proactive and raising your hand a little bit even more than you feel you should. So that took a little bit of time, but other than that, it's pretty similar.
I see. Okay. Next question, which is actually, I think this is a good question, asked by Louise. She asks, essentially, how does strategy and operation team impact Google product vision and product strategy compared to, let's say, product management teams per se?
So there are strategy and operations team working in alignment with the product managers. So they're actually part of our broader business partners. So we kind of influence and co-define the roadmaps, if you will. And the second value add from our angle is actually we are closer to customers, if you will, right? Like a lot of feedback from sales, we can actually like reflect that and work into our product offering. And a lot of the customer centricity work that I just mentioned actually plays a role in that. So I think we have partnership, and secondly, we actually have intelligence that they don't. So
I see.
That creates a pretty good synergy.
Understood. So next question. Believe it or not, I invited a lot of Google engineers to actually join to hear you talk about Google. So they're actually curious, for internal transfers to strategy and operation roles, does it require some kind of consulting background, or how does it really work in Google?
I'm not sure there's a lot of I've seen engineer wanting to transfer because most of the engineers thought they live pretty well. But if you do, I think obviously you have an edge in knowing the Google products. There's probably a little bit. I don't think consulting background is a necessary condition. But I think you do want to play to, right? Why you're interested in such, and I think the entry point for you would be product, go-to-market, or strategy and operations org. That provides a better linkage to play on your strengths, but at the same time give you some new learning areas regarding just telling a story and articulating a strategy, if you will.
I see. That makes a lot of sense. Next question is, how did you develop your people skills in consulting, and how did you reach out to get mentorship to get started? Because I asked this question because I felt that I definitely would want you as my manager. You're a very genuine person. So, how did you kind of develop this kind of skill? We're all very curious. I would say it's not on purpose, right? I think I think Google as a place, they encourage you to be yourself, right? So part of me, I'm not trying to fake myself into somebody I'm not. I do care about my team. I do care about the people that I work with, and I try to work with good people. So that's what I've been trying to do. I try to stay away from the people that I don't want to. So I kind of choose my team. If you want to see if I do anything differently, and other than that, I just try to be myself. I see. So it's really about being elective and being true to yourself, which you mentioned in one of your suggestions to us. Thank you very much. That's very interesting. And actually, we talked about a lot of positivity, right? One of the questions was that, have you ever started with a very bad hand let's just say your team just kind of, you can't bear them, you can't get rid of them. How would you navigate, or is there a story you can briefly tell?
Sorry, this is for Google context, right?
Was there any context in consulting as well?
Well, maybe. Because in consulting, the recruiting, the matching process happens with a couple of calls, right? Like you call somebody, associate or analyst, and they position themselves well. You do a few due diligence emails over their past EMs or leadership that work with them. They say, oh yeah, great, this person is great, just take them, and you take them. So like there's not a it's a blind date process. So yes, there are mismatches.
I see.
Sometimes. Yes, there were instances like that. There were instances when I couldn't get along with my manager, or I could not get along with the team that I was leading as a manager. For the latter scenario, I think the go-to is you work through that, right? Like you try to be transparent and you want to be just like work this out collaboratively. If not, right, then you follow through the due process, right? Like you basically find a better place for the associate or analyst, and you get some other people on. But I have not done that. I think that usually the first option works.
I see. Interesting. Okay. I think that's about the end of the question. The audience has very good questions, and how about you provide us as Copy, member consultants joining the MBB in 2020, some of your thoughts and kind of parting words of encouragement. And the audience, please take some time to add Stuart's LinkedIn. He's very friendly. I reached out to him and he got back to me. So please go ahead while he talks about parting words. Stuart, go ahead.
Great. I think you're ahead of the curve. I feel like this group is very proactive and thinking forward. With that mindset, just keep it up. I think that mindset alone will get you to places. And it's a great organizations to be with. So just to have fun, and when you have options, pick the people, not the topic. And I might elaborate what that means, but that's been my philosophy. I pick the people and not what I work on.
I see. Yeah, and definitely it has led you thus far in your career. And we as Copy definitely wish you the best in your endeavors. And may we meet very soon in our near future. Thank you very much, Stuart. So round of applause for you virtually. And we really enjoy your time. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Alex and team.
Okay, great. So actually, for audiences who are still online, let's jump to the last section. As we always say in consulting, feedback is much appreciated, and constant feedback is even better. So please scan this survey on the left and leave some comments for me as a moderator, and more so for Stuart for his time. So please do that. And lastly, while we're doing this, I always want to mention that this wouldn't have been possible, this event, without the help of Copy.